If I told you that the most dangerous events in financial history never appeared on the front page, would you believe me? If I told you that entire nations have quietly rewritten the rules of money without their people even noticing, would it sound like a conspiracy? Or would it sound exactly like what powerful governments have always done, hidden in plain sight, behind complicated words, executive orders, and the illusion of stability? Because today's story isn't just about Bitcoin, the dollar, or the global financial system. It's about a pattern, a cycle, a blueprint that has been used again and again for centuries to control wealth, erase debt, reset economies, and rewrite power itself. A blueprint so old, yet so effective, that every empire eventually uses it. And today, in 2025, you are living inside that same blueprint. But most people don't know it. Most people think inflation is an accident. They think markets are chaotic. They think governments react to crises. But what if the crisis is the strategy? What if the instability is not a mistake, but a deliberate step in the same ancient plan? Welcome to History of Finance, and today, you're going to see what's happening behind the curtains. Not the headlines, not the tweets, not the hype, but the real mechanism of power. The one governments never talk about publicly, yet quietly use when the debt is too high, the money is too weak, and the people are too distracted to understand what's being done to them. Because the truth is simple. The modern financial system is drowning. The United States alone sits on over $37 trillion of debt. And when a government cannot pay its debt, it has only three options: raise taxes, cut spending, or destroy the value of the money it owes. Guess which option every empire in history chooses? Not taxes, not spending cuts. They choose the quiet option, the hidden option, the option that does not require permission. They destroy the money. The Roman Empire did it by secretly reducing silver in their coins. The British Empire did it by abandoning gold during war. The United States did it in 1933, forcing citizens to hand over their gold. And again in 1971, closing the gold window. And again in 2008 and 2020, when trillions were printed without limit. Every time, the population celebrated the solution, not realizing the solution was the sacrifice. And now in 2025, a new chapter has begun. One that uses digital assets, strategic reserves, and new forms of control wrapped in the language of innovation, progress, and national security. This story begins with an executive order. January 23, 2025. President Trump signs a document establishing a national strategic Bitcoin reserve. Media celebrates. Crypto Twitter explodes. Influencers call it bullish. New era of pro-Bitcoin policy. America leading innovation. The crowd cheers. But the crowd only saw the headline. They didn't read the fine print. They didn't understand what strategic reserve truly means in government language. They didn't understand the legal structure, the implications, or the historical precedents. Because when governments declare something a strategic reserve, they don't do it for the people. They do it for control. Oil reserves, uranium reserves, food reserves. Why do they exist? Not for public use, not for private ownership, but for emergencies, for national authority, for centralized control in crisis. So what happens when Bitcoin becomes a strategic reserve? The answer is simple. It becomes subject to the same emergency powers, the same national security rules, the same control frameworks that governments across history have used to seize, restrict, or redirect resources whenever they choose. The excitement lasted 24 hours. Then the silence began. Because the people who read the document realized what the crowd did. This wasn't about promoting Bitcoin. This was about preparing to control it. But why? Why would a government that once ignored Bitcoin suddenly declare it a strategic national asset? Because debt is drowning them. Because the dollar is weakening. Because inflation is no longer a bug, it's a tool. And because when an empire enters the final stage of excess borrowing, it needs new assets to survive. New forms of collateral. New mechanisms to rewrite its financial obligations without admitting collapse. And Bitcoin, for the first time in history, offers the perfect tool. Hard to print, hard to seize, hard to manipulate publicly, but easy to control through legislation, taxation, national security language, and custodial choke points. If you control the infrastructure, you control the asset. Most people don't understand how governments operate when debt becomes fatal. They don't default. They don't announce bankruptcy. They don't confess failure. They simply change the rules quietly, slowly, one signature at a time. Imagine you owe someone $100, but you control the printing press. You can print 100 new dollars, and suddenly your debt becomes meaningless. The value transfers quietly from savers to the government. The public pays the price through inflation without even realizing it. Now imagine the same logic applied to Bitcoin. A government doesn't have to seize your coins directly. They just have to control the pipelines, the on-ramps, the reporting requirements, the exchanges, the institutional custody. Once it becomes critical national infrastructure, control becomes automatic. And that is exactly how governments create economic resets. First, they identify assets that can be used to stabilize the system. Then they redefine those assets legally. Then they integrate them into national strategy. Then they apply emergency powers when the crisis comes. This is the same playbook used in 1933 with gold, the same playbook used in 1971 with the dollar, the same playbook used by every empire in decline. And today, it's being rewritten for the digital era. The world is shifting into a new monetary order, one where Bitcoin, gold, and commodities are becoming the foundation of national power again, because fiat currencies are losing credibility. Central banks know it, governments know it, investors sense it. The only people who don't are the ones who think inflation is temporary. Inflation is not temporary. It's the strategy. Every year it transfers wealth from the public to the government. Every year it makes debts easier to pay with cheaper dollars. Every year it forces people into riskier assets. Every year it pushes the cycle closer to the reset, and that reset is already taking shape across the world. Countries are buying gold at record levels. China, Russia, Turkey, India collectively reshaping their reserves away from dollars. The IMF, the BIS, and the G7 are reorganizing frameworks around digital currencies and asset-backed instruments. New global payment systems are replacing SWIFT, and while most people scroll through TikTok, the structure of money itself is being rewritten. This is where Bitcoin enters the picture not as a freedom tool but as a strategic asset in a high-stakes global game. The US knows China is accumulating Bitcoin through indirect channels. It knows Russia uses mining to bypass sanctions. It knows emerging economies are turning to digital assets to escape dollar dominance. So what does an empire do when its currency weakens? It captures the next foundation of power. Just like Britain captured global gold in the 1800s. Just like the US captured oil in the 1900s. Just like China captured manufacturing in the 2000s. Now the US is positioning itself to capture digital assets in the 2020s. But here's the twist. The public thinks it's bullish. They think Bitcoin being nationalized, whether softly or aggressively, is good for price. And in the short term, they're right. Prices rise, markets pump, optimism spreads. But rising prices do not equal rising freedom. Ask anyone in 1933. Ask anyone in Venezuela. Ask anyone in Turkey. Ask anyone who watched their savings evaporate while assets went vertical. When governments move into markets, they do it for influence, not participation. But why now? Why suddenly in 2025? Because the US debt curve has entered a point of no return. The interest alone is spiraling. Trillions must be paid every year. Tax revenues can't keep up. Borrowing is tightening. Foreign buyers are walking away. China is reducing holdings. Japan is struggling. Europe is fragmented. The Federal Reserve is cornered. There is only one way out. A controlled reset, a managed transition, a strategic revaluation of assets, one that strengthens the government position without triggering panic. Bitcoin's strategic reserve classification is not a headline. It is the first move in a long game, a game where digital assets, gold and commodities will be used to recollateralize the future monetary system. This is what the world is moving toward, and your time to understand it is running out, because the new financial order will not announce itself. It will arrive silently in executive orders, in regulatory frameworks, in strategic reserves, in digital currency pilots, in restructuring deals, in inflation waves, in sudden market rallies that feel like opportunity but function as extraction. The people who understand history always see the cycle. The people who don't always pay for it. But here's the part no one sees coming. The same tools being used to control Bitcoin can also make Bitcoin the ultimate weapon against financial collapse. If governments accumulate it, the price inevitably rises not just to $100,000 or $200,000, but into the territory where it becomes a systemic pillar. The higher it goes, the more power it holds, and the more dangerous it becomes to ignore. The question isn't whether Bitcoin will rise. The question is who will control it when it does. And that's the real game of 2025. As the world enters the era of controlled inflation, financial repression, and strategic asset accumulation, only one truth remains consistent. The system survives by transferring value quietly, gradually, invisibly, from the public to the state, from savers to debtors, from individuals to institutions, from those who don't understand to those who write the rules. But if you recognize the pattern early, you stop being a victim of history, you become a student of it. And a student of history is always one step ahead of the collapse. This is History of Finance, and if you want more deep investigations, more hidden truths, and more breakdowns of how power really works behind the curtain, make sure you like the video, subscribe to the channel, and share this with anyone who still believes inflation is an accident. Because once you understand the blueprint, you can finally see the game.